being Hello there. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to wait a couple more minutes to let people join, and then we'll begin momentarily. All right. I think we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing? It's a nice cold Minnesota day. For those of you in Minnesota, I think that's probably a lot of people on the call. Hope everyone's staying warm. Today we're here to talk about social media trends for 2022. And like I said in some of the promo around this, if you've the kind of the genesis behind this was I started doing this trend at this presentation at Social Media Breakfast years ago, and obviously we're not having those right now. So I thought this year we just do it pandemic style over Zoom. So thank you for signing up, and hopefully you find the information useful. My trend presentations are usually not like a lot of the other ones you might see. They're not really shiny object related. It's more like more pragmatic, more designed to be more useful. So you can take information and bring it back and use it in your day jobs next week, next month, throughout the year. So that's kind of the idea behind it. A little bit more about me. I know I see a lot of familiar faces on the call, so some of you know me, but some of you don't. I'm an independent social media marketing consultant. I've been doing that for the last 12 years. I usually work for mid-sized and large companies, mostly here in Minnesota, but not always. Over the years, I've worked with a lot of companies you've probably heard of, like Walmart and General Mills and Sleep Number, and then probably a number you haven't. I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of St. Thomas and the University of Minnesota. I've been doing that for the last 3 years. I teach classes in social media and digital marketing. And you can also find me blogging at erichansen.com. You can sign up for my e-newsletter there if you're so inclined. I talk about a lot of the same stuff you're going to hear about today. I also run a podcast with my friend Kevin Hunt at General Mills called the Hansen and Hunt Podcast. You can sign up for that at hansenandhunt.com. Yeah, I think that's enough about me. I think we should just dive right in. So like I said, I got 9 trends here to talk about today. A lot of these trends are backed up with stats, data, and examples. and ideas, a few ideas in there to get you thinking. So again, the hope is really not to the hope is really to give you stuff to think about and stuff you could potentially implement in the year ahead as it relates to these trends. So trend number one, more companies. I think more companies will explore alternatives to Facebook in 2022 because I don't know if you noticed, but Facebook had quite a year in 2021. This all happened on Facebook's watch in the last year. We saw Frances Haugen testify before Congress and pull back the curtain on a variety of items that Facebook most likely didn't want out in the open air. It turns out they kind of lied to us about their user numbers, especially amongst younger people. We kind of assumed, I think most of us assumed the younger people were not hanging on to Facebook anymore, but the numbers kind of finally confirmed that. You might remember that Facebook was down for 6 hours on October 4th last year, and people flipped out and went to other platforms like Twitter to air their grievances against Facebook. Leaked documents demonstrated how Instagram was bad for kids, and Facebook leadership knew it. Wasn't great for the brand. And then, of course, you had the big boycott back in July. So point being, Facebook didn't have a great year from a PR and a reputation perspective. And that plays into kind of what we're talking about here. Social media today, just anecdotally, I know this isn't very super scientific, but I think it kind of gives you an inkling for what people are thinking. They took a survey here about, which of these 4 platforms we'd be putting more focus on in the year ahead. And you can see in both instances, this on the left, this was on LinkedIn, the one on the right was on Twitter. You can see Facebook was last, and by a pretty wide margin. So a graphic from marketingcharts.com also kind of shows you where people's heads are at. Where do you expect digital platforms to change in 2022? Investment, where are you going to be investing in the next year? And you can see investment in TikTok, not surprising, high. And then you go down to Facebook and you see increased investment, not so high, and decreasing investment is one of the highest. So all these combined with the feel we get, the reputational hits they've taken, it just kind of leads us down this road, right? So your questions to ask yourself right now really are, number one, are you over-indexing in Facebook advertising versus other platforms? Because many brands are still. And there's great advertising options on some of the other platforms, and we're just not really taking advantage of those. So that's number one. Number two, how many channels are you actively on? You always have to think about like how much you can actually handle. And does it really make sense to spend a ton of time on Facebook anymore and invest that many resources there? And then finally, what does your social media marketing plan look like if Facebook isn't an option? Like, let's say, Facebook does go the way of MySpace, which probably isn't reasonable in the year ahead. What would you do? What is probably a little more reasonable is that it takes another big hit in 2022. And then you're looking at 2023 with Facebook being, almost, slightly irrelevant for many audiences. I think those are the big questions to ask yourself right now as we head into 2022. And then that leads to alternatives, right? Like you have alternatives, especially with some of these audiences that historically have been big power users on Facebook. For example, young men aged 18 to 24, right? Like conceivably those can constitute 14% of all Facebook users. Although maybe it's not that high given the data they just shared with us. But one alternative platform there would definitely be Reddit, right? 36% of all Americans 18 to 29 have used Reddit in the past, and the ad options on that platform are proliferating. And it's clearly a space that young men are hanging out on, right? What about middle-aged moms? 10% of all Facebook users are those moms from 35 to 44. Well, a good alternative there would be TikTok. According to their data, 42% of all TikTok users are 30 to 49, and 59% of all users on TikTok are women. We know TikTok as a platform is blowing up, but more importantly, we know that ad and shopping options are quickly evolving on TikTok, and that, to me, is a great way to reach those middle-aged moms. Or what about young women? That group makes up 13% of all Facebook users. One platform you might think about there, again, one of the most unheralded platforms, I think, personally, is Pinterest. And for sure, for younger women, that's a huge one. 30% of their entire audience is women ages 25 to 34. So, and unlike Facebook, which has become a pretty negative place, as we all know, 8 to 10 Pinterest users say the platform makes them feel positive. So we know that Pinterest is more of a place of inspiration, happiness, why wouldn't you want your brand and your content affiliated with that versus affiliated with negativity and misinformation and all the things that are going on with Facebook right now? So I think that's a trend we're going to see play out. We're already seeing it, but I think it's going to maybe accelerate a little bit more in 2022. So I told you we weren't going to talk about shiny objects, so we're not going to talk about the metaverse because I don't think that's really the immediate what's next. I do think it's coming, obviously, but I don't think it's the immediate what's next. What I think is the immediate what's next is audio, right? Because the data tell a pretty compelling story. If you look at the infinite dial, which is by many regards the de facto report on audio, compiled by Edison Research each year, you can see here just monthly audio listening is at its highest peak it's ever been, right? Podcast listening also at its highest peak it's ever been in 2021. And more importantly, with podcast listening, it's not that more people are just listening to a podcast. It's like people are listening to 8 podcasts in the last week. US podcast listeners averaged 8 podcasts. And look at that, look at the pie graph down here, the pie chart. 1 in 5 are listening to 11 or more. So people are listening to a lot of podcasts right now, which is probably not surprising. A lot of us are stuck at home. We might have a little bit more time on our hands, but podcast listening is way up in the past. And then I thought this chart from Trinity Audio is interesting too. The percentage of content listen through rate, that's LTR, based on content length. With video content, we're always kind of taught, well, it's got to be shorter videos. With audio content, that's not necessarily the same thing, right? This data is kind of proving that out, where it's like listen through rate for content 5 or more minutes long is almost 80%, 75%, somewhere in there. So the length of audio content is not a huge factor. In fact, I think it almost benefits you to have a little bit longer audio content because it adds to that richness of the experience. So at the same time, social listening is evolving too, right? In August, Clubhouse announced that it's averaging 700,000 rooms per day. I'm sure that's down from where they were in like February, March, and April of last year when they were blowing things out of the water. And it was like the it platform, but that's still a decent number. So it's kind of carving out this little niche, right? We know that Twitter and Facebook are adding social audio options. And now we hear that LinkedIn is testing this too. So social audio is evolving. They're making it a priority. I think it's going to come. And brand opportunities are already kind of out there. In fact, I saw this from McDonald's, or not from McDonald's, but about McDonald's, where on Twitter Spaces, there was a woman who was hosting this this Twitter Spaces room with people mocking call-ins, like drive-through role play, which went on and on and on for hours. Wouldn't that be a great opportunity for McDonald's or Wendy's, some other aspiring brand that would have some fun with that? This seems like a logical play, right? We know that social audio has had its kind of eye roll moments. I mean, some of you might have remembered the whale moan rooms on Clubhouse last spring. Funny and just kind of ASMR-y, that kind of thing. But for the most part, I think there are opportunities for brands, right? There are opportunities for brands to have, that fireside chat concept on Clubhouse, for example, or maybe on LinkedIn coming up would be a perfect place to do that, right? When they roll out their social audio capability. Or could it be repurposing your corporate podcast on Twitter Spaces? Could it be giving your followers the option to listen to your blog posts versus always reading them? The bottom line is, what does your brand sound like in 2022? That's the question. Because if you look at brand style guides, right, we're very good at figuring out how brands look, how they feel, what the tone is. We're good at all that stuff. That's always in a brand style guide. But what typically sometimes is not a brand style guide is what it sounds like. In 2022, you kind of have to think about that. I mean, we showed you the stats from Edison Research, and that there's a lot of people listen to a lot of audio, and I think that's going to keep going up for a while. So what your brand sounds like, it makes a difference in 2022, and it's probably time to start thinking about that. Number 3, I think executives are going to get a lot more real on LinkedIn in 2022. And the last couple of years have been great, because for years I've been one of those people that's been saying, hey, we need to get the executives on LinkedIn, and here's why: employer brand, recruiting, better channel to communicate with employees, various reasons, right? And we got the stiff arm. Many of us have been battling for that for years, right? Well, the pandemic opened that door up, and you saw people like Mike Roman, who's the CEO of 3M, out there in a big way, right? talking about the pandemic, talking about the response to COVID-19, talking about the mask production. Like they talked about a ton of stuff. And that was a great channel for him to communicate with employees, to communicate with customers, to communicate with the public. Um, and that was true for many executives over the last couple of years. So we got executives on LinkedIn now, but the challenge now is like they're it's kind of like this corporate communications channel, right? Which is fine in many ways, but in other ways, what people really want is that human connection, right? And we're not getting that. Like a lot of us are, again, we're stuck at home, we're virtual, we're not always seeing people at the office, namely executives, right? And we had a hard time seeing executives, before the pandemic, right? It wasn't like you walked down the hall and you saw your CEO every day if you're working at a Target. But now with the remote nature of work, we're seeing them far less. So this makes it even more important, and even more important to see that human connection, that authenticity. So I thought I'd give you some examples of what this looks like and what I think you're going to see more of this play out in the coming year. So speaking of Target, Laisha Ward, who's the Executive Vice President and Chief External Engagement Officer at Target. Well, Laisha, for all intents and purposes, is the online spokesperson for Target right now. And I don't know, you never know if they're doing this on purpose or if it's just by accident. But if you research their executive set, the other ones really aren't out there in big ways, right? Brian Cornell, he's not even on LinkedIn. Their CFO has a small following, but he's not really active. Katie Boylan, their Chief Communications Officer, small following, not really active. Meanwhile, Laisha Ward has over 300,000 followers, and she's super active. And more importantly, she's posting stuff like this, right? She's definitely posting stuff that would be considered corporate communications content, which is furthering initiatives at Target that she would care about, right? But she's also mixing in stuff like this, which really doesn't have anything to do with Target. Give yourself the gift of time. She's talking about going on vacation, unplugging, stuff like that. And look at the photo, right? How many photos have we seen from executives that look like this? Not too many. Not too many, but she's out there doing that. And it's resonating big time. Look at the engagement scores she's seeing here. Over 2,000 likes and almost 150 comments. What about Ed Bastian, who's the CEO of Delta Airlines? Ed is certainly sharing Delta-related information, and lots of it, on LinkedIn, but he's also mixing in content like this. And what better way to communicate with fellow parents than to talk about dropping your kid off at school for the first time, right? That's one of the de facto parent moments in a parent's life. And here he is talking about it with pictures, opening up, kind of cutting open a vein. And that's not that abnormal for him. He's talked about his dogs before, peaches and all over. He's talked about candidly about the passing of a senator. He opens up from time to time. And not surprisingly, those kind of posts are usually his most popular. So he's a nice example too from a pretty big company, Delta Airlines. And then finally, the example that many of you probably know, even if you don't follow Sarah Blakely on LinkedIn, I'd highly encourage you to do that because she's the example right now of how a CEO can use LinkedIn to the advantage of their company. Because she is doing all the right things on LinkedIn. And sure, she's talking about Spanx, and sure, she's promoting the company, but she's also promoting how to work and be a leader when you're a mom with a post like this, right? Again, how many executives do we know that would show this picture publicly on a social media channel? And yet here she is posting it, and oh, geez, look at the likes and comments, right? And this is what she gets every time when she does something like this, right? You've probably seen this video floating around the last couple months where she announced when her company was acquired, she announced to all of her employees, that they were getting $10,000 in cash. And I believe it was 2, maybe it was 4 round trip first class air tickets anywhere in the world they wanted to go to. Every employee got that. She talked about this. There were tears on both sides for her and for employees. There was screaming. There was celebration, and it was all caught on video. And it was, executive authenticity at its best. And this is why right now what's happening is the companies, the CEOs of these and leaders of these smaller companies are kicking the CEOs and leaders of the big companies' butts because they're willing to open up. They're willing to be vulnerable. They're willing to take a few risks. Whereas some of the leaders of the big companies are not there yet. But because this is happening, because Sarah Blakely's doing this, because Ed Bastian's doing that, because Laisha Ward's doing that, I think you're gonna see more of it in 2022 because authenticity, the human nature of executives, the remote nature of our work right now is all leading down that road. So that's another big trend I think we're going to see more of in the year ahead. Deprioritizing engagement as a KPI. I think now before you scoff at this one, let me make the case a little bit here, and it requires a little bit of a history lesson to start. Backtrack to 2009 when I kind of got more into social media marketing. It was engagements for everything, right? Twitter chats were all over the place. Companies were getting involved in those. Blog comments were a thing. I mean, it was all about comments. Engagements were everywhere, and engagements was like the metric, right? And it was for a while. But in 2022, the world has changed, right? Social e-commerce is surging very strong right now. We're going to talk about that in a minute. I would argue social media in general is about advertising now in a big way. So social ads are reigning supreme. And to be honest, brands aren't really engaging with their customers as much as they probably could. And sometimes they're not even interested. So it's a different world, right? And that's partly because behaviors have shifted. And we'll just pick on Twitter here for a second. But if you look at this graphic and these this data set, 4 in 10 Twitter users say the most important reason they use the site is for entertainment. And then right after that is stay informed, as you can see below. So you got 60% of the Twitter users just saying they go there to be entertained or get informed. Well, what does that mean? That means that's one-way communication, right? They're not going there to engage with anyone. They're going there for information, be entertained. Like that's one-way communication. That's not engagement. So behaviors have shifted a little bit. In addition, engagements in 2022 usually equal likes, right? And I'm picking on Anderson a little bit here, but this is prevalent throughout the industry right now, where you look at any brand and look at their ratio of shares and comments and likes on any platform. It's always going to be super heavy on likes. More so for some brands than others, but in the audits I've done in the last couple of years, super heavy on likes. So as we all know, likes is the most passive engagement. You're really looking for shares and at the very least comments. So if engagement is all about likes, like how valuable really is it? And then number 3, like I just mentioned, brands in many cases aren't even engaging back. And I'm not talking about like, B2B brands or brands that might be considered like oil and gas companies and stuff like that. I'm talking about Target. Like Target had a great post here last fall about, Target stores will be closed on Thanksgiving. Here's why we're doing this, blah, blah, blah. And they saw all sorts of engagement. You can see here 188 comments on this. I believe this is a Facebook post. Might have been a tweet. That was a Facebook post. And they were nowhere to be found in the comment thread, right? So here was a great opportunity for them to talk about like why they close the stores, what they're looking forward to, what are their plans going forward, how are they valuing employees, and they just said nothing. So to me, it's like, well, are we prioritizing engagement here, or are we just chasing numbers? Are we really interested in a two-way conversation, or are we just interested in pushing information out? Because it kind of seems like we're just interested in pushing information out. So maybe we need to get truly squared away with talking to our customers again, because right now it seems kind of one way. So I'm not saying their engagements are going to go away as a metric for sure. But what I am saying is maybe they won't be the first metric we look at. Whereas like for the last 10 years, they kind of have. They've been a big part of how we measure success on LinkedIn or on social media. And as we enter into 2022, I think the metrics are changing. Number 5, I think expectations around corporate blogging are going to change too. And corporate blogging has never been more popular than it is right now. So the University of Massachusetts and Dartmouth do a study each year that talks about social media usage for the Fortune 500. And you can see here in 2020, blogging was at all-time high. In fact, it was almost triple, more than triple what it was, almost quadruple what it was in 2015. So blogging, super popular. Lots of Fortune 500 companies are doing it. But I think we need to reframe how we think about it, because number one, most people want to kind of stay on the social media network they're active on. And what we see a lot of with corporate blogs is like companies trying to drive traffic from social media networks to the corporate blog, right? But the behavior is most people want to stay on the network, right? Especially on their phones, right? So that's number one. Number 2, the platforms are outwardly prohibiting or discouraging links in many cases, right? They're either banning it in some cases, or they're saying, no, we really don't want you to put a link in there by the way they're organizing the algorithm. And then number 3, and this one's on us, we become lazy with our teases, man. I mean, this Rooster is an agency I audited as a result of a recent project, and this is typical of what we see with companies teasing blog posts, right? Like we've just gotten lazy. And so for all those reasons, I think we need to reframe how we think about how we use corporate blogs. And I think it starts with SEO, right? Corporate blogs are really all about SEO, if you ask me, because they're all about organic search, and that organic search should be your number one traffic driver to your blog. And if it's not, you're probably not doing it right, right? So maybe conduct some keyword research and start planning towards that goal versus throwing stuff up there and trying to drive traffic from social media. I mean, look at your Google Analytics. Is it working? The chances are, if you're not promoting those posts to drive traffic, it's probably not working. And meanwhile, organic search should be number one because it's driving long tail traffic to your blog that will come to you month after month, year over year. And it should get bigger over time if you're doing it right again. So SEO, number one. Number two, I think using the content from your corporate blogs right in your social posts should be more of the thinking rather than trying to drive traffic to your site, right? So again, driving traffic might not be working, right? You're looking at your Google Analytics, you're like, Twitter's not really driving any traffic. Why are we still doing this? Well, your audience wants to stay on Twitter. They don't want to, they just told you about Twitter. They want to be entertained and they want information. Well, they don't want to necessarily click through. They want the information right in the platform. So why couldn't you take the blog posts you're currently writing for the blog and make them into like maybe 2 or 3 or 4 individual posts on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook, right? Just kind of like HubSpot's doing here, right? Just take you're still using the same content. You're just putting it on the platform now. So you take a blog post, you break it into like little chunks and you make it into 3 posts. Isn't that a more effective and efficient use of the blog content anyway? Like that seems to make more sense, and you're seeing some companies do that. And then finally, and I've been doing that with one of my clients for years, using blog posts as media relations fodder. Why couldn't you pitch some of your blog posts as byline articles to trade publications? That's what we do with my client at Trustmark, where they have great blog content that they write, and I just turn around and kind of pitch the idea to industry publications. And again, we've been doing that for years with great success. So could you pitch subject matter experts that write the blogs as, guests on industry podcasts on the topic they wrote about? Could you set up your own room on Clubhouse or Twitter Spaces and talk about the topic? I mean, you have opportunities to leverage these blog posts and create more of a story arc for it using media relations or creating your own media on social channels. But you're not trying to drive traffic. It's a different way of thinking about it. So that's what I mean by reframing the conversation around corporate blogging, because I think it's still a big opportunity. It's still there. It's just kind of changing the thinking a little bit in 2021 or 2022. Number 6, original content kind of trumps the share, specifically on LinkedIn. So what I'm talking about here is historically the share, again, on LinkedIn has been the holy grail, right? Because in 2015, for example, let's just go back 7 years, maybe not even 7 years, maybe 5, it could be 2017 really. What was everyone looking to do with employee advocacy and leadership? They were saying, okay, they were asking employees to share corporate posts because we wanted to extend the reach of those posts, right? It was super easy for the employees to do. All of a sudden now we get all these employee advocacy tools that help us do that. That was the deal. We want you to share corporate posts so it increases reach. Made sense, right? However, in 2022, I'm not sure that's the case anymore. Shares are no longer garnering as much engagement, as you can see by the CEO of Digital River's post right here. He's sharing a great post from the corporate account, but the engagement scores, as you can see here, those are pretty low for an executive, right? Meanwhile, at the same time, original content is much more powerful. I go back to those posts I just showed you from Laisha Ward and Ed Bastian and Sarah Spanks, or Sarah Blakely. When they're pairing unique visuals that feature them in many cases, along with text, that content is destroying shared content. Destroying. And I will show you actual proof. Let's take Jeff Martha, the CEO of Medtronic, right? His last 10 shares on LinkedIn have averaged 379 engagements. A lot of those were of Medtronic content, but some of them were from other content, right? But 379. His last 10 organic posts, like this post right here of him and his family celebrating Thanksgiving. He's got his unique visual, unique text. Those are averaging almost 1,300 engagements per post. That's a 300% plus increase Okay, that's one person though. What about other people? What about Shelly Abach, who the CEO of Sleep Number? Her last 10 shares on LinkedIn, almost 40 engagements. Her last 10 organic posts, 150. Again, almost 400% increase. What about Satya Nadella, Microsoft CEO? This is a much bigger company. His last 10 shared posts, 5,000 engagements, last 10 organic, almost 11,000, 100% increase. So you can see the trend, and you can see it's not close. And I can tell you, again, from the audits I've done in the past, this is not just like big companies. This is every company right now. The shares are not working as well. Original LinkedIn, original content with photos and text, video is in a big way, especially if it's airing more towards that humanizing the executive or the leader or the employee. That stuff in particular is working very, very well. So that's another big trend we're going to see more of in the year ahead. Number 7, a resurgent Twitter will be a brand builder, not a traffic driver in 2022. So a question that I think myself and a lot of us were asking prior to the pandemic was, should we give up on Twitter? Right? It wasn't performing. We weren't seeing great engagement there. I talked about that a little bit ago. It wasn't driving traffic. We talked about that as well. So what is it good for? Like, is it really working for us? Do we need, or stretch thin anyways? I was asking my clients that as well. And in a lot of the cases, the answer was, yeah, we probably should give up on Twitter. Let's keep the account, obviously, but let's not put as much effort into it as we were before. And, consider how most brands use Twitter, really, right? As a traffic driver. That's what they're trying to do, right? Look at Mayo Clinic here on the right. But is that working? Again, I look at your analytics. Like, is it driving traffic? Is Twitter really driving traffic to your site? A lot of companies are using Twitter as a sales tool. But to me, it's like, well, we just talked about why people use Twitter. Why are they using it? They're using it for entertainment and to get information. They don't want to be sold. It's kind of like LinkedIn in a way. Like, I'm not sure people want to be sold there. Many brands using it as a sign-up mechanism for webinars. Again, here's Mayo Clinic talking about that. But I would argue again, like, why are people going to LinkedIn or to Twitter? They're not doing that to sign up for webinars. So to me, there's really just one big reason for brands to use Twitter in 22, and it's a really good one. It's just a matter of shifting our focus to it, and that is to stoke brand love. So IBM is a good example of this, right? Look at these posts right here. Pretty creative, but just pretty simple, right? I mean, how many? Look at the text is only 4 words, 3 words, simple visual. But look at the engagement scores, right? And specifically look at the likes and the retweets, which is what you're looking for, because that's the brand love, right? If I can just hit like, I love it, brand love. If I just hit retweet, straight retweet, brand love. I support you, is what that's saying. I love you. That's what they're going for. That's all they're going for. They're not looking for engagement. I know likes and retweets count as engagement, but really it's just a simple click. It's passive engagement, like we talked about. That's what they're going for. John Deere, another great example. And specifically what it seems like they try to do is inspire pride amongst their super fans. So they're going after the people who absolutely love John Deere, they're kind of like Harley Davidson for farmers, right? Like the people that love John Deere, farmers that love John Deere, they really love them. And that's what they're playing to every time, especially with, like, they do a great job with user-generated content, like this one on the right here. They're doing that all the time. And that's all about that brand love for the super fans. Microsoft, another great example, playing to your power users. Microsoft knows damn well everyone's on Teams right now, right? They know that. They know they got a power user base. So why not have some fun with that? With tweets like these. That's totally what they're doing. And again, look at the like counts, right? That's all they're looking for. Brand love, brand love, brand love, brand love. So I think Twitter has gone through this interesting resurgence where they were almost, I feel like as a brand tool, it was kind of almost on the brink of death before the pandemic a little bit. And the pandemic revived it a little bit, I feel like. And I know some of this has to do with Twitter behind the scenes, how they've amped up a lot of their offerings and they put a lot of effort into things. But at the same time, I think it's just, this is what it's become for brands. So you're going to see a lot more companies go down that path in the year ahead too. Number 8, social selling. Finally, after years of being on a list like this, I think becomes real. And the key will be it's going to be streaming. Social selling will be streaming. And in many ways, social commerce is already here, right? Just look at some of these stats, right? 40% of internet users in the US made at least one social commerce purchase in 2021. I'm guessing some of you probably made a social commerce purchase in 2021. And more importantly, 8 in 10 US businesses anticipate doing, handling social, selling their products and services on social in the next 3 years. So this is a big deal now, and it's going to become even bigger, as evidenced by this graphic right here from Accenture, right? Here's the social commerce opportunity, right? Last year, and it's going to triple in 3 years, triple. So yeah, big deal, right? And it's going to be streamed, right? So this graphic kind of shows you like, how is this happening? Well, yeah, gamers, live streaming gamers, big deal, but also social live streaming, right? So the streaming is what's driving it. And anecdotally, I can tell you from what I've seen, that's definitely true. And the reports are saying so far, and it's somewhat early on in this trend, but that live commerce is extremely lucrative. One report I read said that companies report conversion rates approaching 30% with live commerce, which is up to 10 times higher than conventional e-commerce. And what's more, they're bringing in younger audiences, right? The companies are seeing their share of younger audiences increase by up to 20% via these live streams, which makes sense because it's usually happening on, a lot of it's happening on TikTok right now, but then the other part of it's happening on younger platforms too, like Instagram and Twitter. So this makes sense from a business standpoint as well. And, meanwhile, in China, they've been a little bit ahead of the curve on this, right? You can see the live commerce trend line here from just, 2017 to 2020. So China was just a little bit ahead of us, right? Now the rest of the world's going to catch up with this live streaming and live selling on social media. Now, in the US, the company that leads the way with live commerce and streaming social selling, it might surprise you. It's Walmart. No question about it. I remember seeing their first live stream on TikTok 2 Christmases ago, right, during the first part of the pandemic. And I thought that was interesting. And since then, you can see here, they've tested 15 shoppable live stream events across 5 platforms. They've launched walmart.com/live, which has got all sorts of live streaming content on there. They've worked with more than 20 creators and hosts to do these live streams, like Jason Derulo. And they were the first retailer to pilot shoppable live stream events on TikTok, YouTube, and now Twitter. So they've definitely been the one that's leading the way, but they're certainly not alone, right? You have PacSun, Bloomingdale's, L'Oreal, Bobby Brown, Nordstrom, Petco, a lot of different retailers, makeup brands, Pet Brand and Petco. PacSun in particular, if you look at their site, they're all over this. Like they've got a huge part, they're kind of like Walmart. They got a big part of their website devoted to this. They're all over this on TikTok. I mean, it's kind of their core audience, obviously, but it's coming. And I think 2022 is the year where it really takes off. You're kind of already seeing it. So social selling, live streaming, that's how it's going to happen. And then finally, my last trend, I think you're going to see a lot of companies get back to this notion of community in 2022. Because some of the survey data is telling us this, right? Some of the surveys I've seen recently, 64% of marketers plan to invest in social media communities in the year ahead. More than half plan to build social media communities. So the data is telling us that, and it makes sense if you think about it. Like, why would you invest in more of a community approach in the year ahead? Well, number one, it's going to cultivate those referrals and recommendations you want from social media, which is always a big goal, right? That's huge. Retaining customers is always a focus with social communities. And, we've lost sight of that in the last few years. I know I just talked about social selling and how that's going to blow up. And using social for customer acquisition really isn't going nowhere, obviously. It's going to get bigger. But I feel like over the years, we've been so focused on acquisition with social, we've kind of forgot about the fact that social media is really good at helping you retain your customers. And from a business standpoint, that can be more effective because retaining customers is cheaper, much cheaper, usually, than acquiring customers, right? So I think that's a big reason why. And then number 3, community building can be a great way to, uncover innovations and insights from your customers. Because if you're building communities, you're doing a lot more listening, right? Engaging. Well, that means you're discovering like what they love about your products, what they don't love, what other things they're interested in. That can all lead to product and service innovation, which is on trend. Like that's a big deal in social media these days. And I think that kind of ties in with community building very closely. So some examples of what this looks like right now, Peloton is a great example of this. For those of you that are Peloton riders, you might be a member of this community already. I am not, but I'm a member of this community just for research purposes, just because I think it's so fascinating. This is their official member page on Facebook. And I can tell you that thing is super active. They are all over the place. Members are super active on there, posting, commenting, liking, all over the place. And Peloton, we'll post stuff like this Taylor Swift post here once in a while. But where they're really seeing traction is they're an active participant, right? So what a lot of brands have done with community building over the years is like, well, they'll post something once in a while, but they're not really active in the comment streams, right? But Peloton is. Like they're not always in there, but they're in there enough. They show up enough where you're like, okay, they're paying attention. They're in there. And you can see with Tiffany's post here on the right, they're the first comment. Jerry's post, I didn't highlight it, but they were in the comment stream saying, congratulations, what an accomplishment, blah, blah, blah. Like they're showing up. And in many ways, building communities, that's really the number one thing, just showing up consistently day after day after day. Fitbit, I got a Fitbit for Christmas this year, so I'm all over this. On Twitter, they do a really nice job of community building where in a lot of cases, all they're doing is acknowledging comments. So you can see here, this person tagged Fitbit and also used the hashtag. So, they easily could have seen that and just hit the like button, but instead it's an easy response, an easy comment. That's community building 101, right? But they're also doing things that venture into that innovation and insights part that we talked about, right? This person says, hey, Fitbit, Google, when are we going to start being able to store Spotify on our trackers? It's 2022. I think it's about time, don't you? Yeah, they come back like, yeah, we'll send that over to our product team and we'll look at that. And they send to the product team's community site, and there you go. There's product innovation potentially in action. Well, what about this one down here, right? So this one doesn't even tag Fitbit at all. Doesn't tag them, doesn't use a hashtag. Like there's no reason they should be looking at this. And yeah, the person's using some choice language, but she's talking about being active. That's in their wheelhouse. That's what they want to promote, right? So here they are, big same, like they're acknowledging and they're responding and they're being a part of the conversation. They're building community. What about Glossier? People know all about this probably in the makeup world, but it's right in their Instagram profile, right? Glossier is a people-powered beauty ecosystem. Ecosystem. That's another word for community, right? And this really comes through for them on their Instagram with their content. You can see the poster on the right. This is brilliant. They're just harvesting reviews, 5-star reviews from different sites, right? And using it as content. Brilliant, right? Or what about some of the stuff they got here, right? So on the left here, they're featuring an influencer's medicine cabinet with some of their products in there, right? User-generated content. On the right, they're profiling. For a while, I think they still have this. They had a profile series where they're looking at their influencers, their employees, some of their biggest customers, stuff like that. But again, more user-generated content, right? So if you look at their Instagram page, it's not as much about their product front and center, which they could easily do, and sometimes they do. It's more about the community. Their Instagram page really is an ecosystem. That's the way they're treating it. That's the way they treat a lot of their social channels. So you probably see more brands get back to prioritizing that community for some of the reasons we talked about. In that case, I think your brand is going to have to take a little bit of a back seat, right? We've been so focused on customer acquisition, and that means pushing the product and service, but creating community is all about your customers, your existing customers. So focusing on what makes them tick, focusing on what interests them, all that kind of stuff is going to be a little more important. And then that focus on UGC is really going to be a big one. And we've seen that taken off during the pandemic, obviously, for various reasons. And I don't see that letting up. Even if things go back to quasi-normal in 2022, it's still going to be a huge focus for a lot of brands. So, all that leads up to, I think, a little bit bigger focus on community in the year ahead. So there you have it, 9 social media trends for the year ahead. If you want to learn more about me or hear more of this thinking, or you can subscribe to my newsletter. Comes out every Friday. For those of you who already get it, you can pass it along. My podcast at hansonhunt.com. You can sign up there to listen to that, subscribe to that, or if you want to connect to me on LinkedIn, you can find me there. And if you have any other thoughts or ideas or suggestions, or if you want to work with me, you can reach me at eric@erichansen.com. All right, I want to see if I can open it up for questions, or you could text, or you could send me textions in the chat, I guess, too. It might be a good way to do it. Otherwise, we'll give you 15, 10 minutes back in your day.
Hi, Eric. This is Alyssa Myers.
Oh, yeah.
How are you?
Good.
Good. I just had a few questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, shoot.
All right. So my first question is, I was interested in the point about the resurgence of Twitter being more of a brand builder, not necessarily a traffic driver.
Yeah.
And then, one big reason being that Twitter should focus more on that brand awareness. From a KPIs perspective, knowing that KPI would likely be more focused on likes and retweets, how does that kind of play into the point with kind of deprioritizing engagement as a KPI?
Yeah, like I said, I don't think the engagements are really going anywhere. It's just they won't be, I don't think they'll be number one anymore. And they've been number one for a while, So like they'll still be on the scorecard, for example, but they just won't be, first.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I could see like, like to me, it's like, I mean, it's already happening with some of the social platforms, really, if you think about it, because like stories, for example, like, well, there's not a ton of engagement that can be done there, right? But it's so you're measuring impressions. A lot of cases, you might be measuring forwards and backwards and stuff like that, but it's a lot of more reach metrics, and that's kind of what the deprioritizing engagements gets at. Because now we're going to have, when we talk about social selling, right? That's going to be a huge deal. So like you're going to have more metrics that get closer to the sale, which are obviously going to be number one and number two and higher up in the food chain, which kind of pushes the engagement metrics a little further down. And they're fine, but they probably get a little bit more at what I was talking about with community too. It's like, maybe it's like customer acquisition, customer retention, and the engagement numbers will be more important for customer retention in many ways, right? Because like that's what that brand love thing is getting at.
Definitely.
And,
Thank you. Yes, makes sense from a prioritization perspective.
Good question. Any other questions?
Hey, Eric, this is Tara Sullivan. I had a quick question about if any of this advice or trend forecasting is any different for nonprofits.
Ooh,
social service nonprofits, right, who don't have a product to sell.
Right. Probably some of it. I'd have to think through that a little bit, but I'm sure some of it, man. These trends are really meant to just be top line, so it's like, it's not really designed to be like, specific for any one client or company or nonprofit. But I'd have to think about that. I can get back to you though, with an email or a direct message or something like that, and think, because that'd be interesting to think about that. Kind of put me on the spot there with that one.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. I'd like to think about that. Let me get back to you on that. Good question.
Hey, Eric, this is Adam Johnson with C.H. Robinson.
Yeah.
You talked about executives on LinkedIn. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts or really hearing anything related to employee social advocacy more broadly, or any changes we're seeing there, or if there's sort of any takeaway for 2022 in that.
Yeah, good question. I mean, I know that's a big one on people's radar screens based on what I'm hearing. Like a lot of companies are playing around with that concept, either starting up for the first time or tweaking what they're already doing. I can't help but think of the same trend we saw for executives. I think that plays into it somehow, because like I think the challenge, having been involved with that with a couple of clients in the past, I think the challenge is like these tools that you buy, like the dynamic signals of the world, are fine, but they set it up in a way where everyone's, where it's the share, right? Like that's what it's based on, or everyone's sharing the same content and there's no uniqueness to it. Well, that flies in the face of what's working on LinkedIn, right? So what's working on LinkedIn is the human stuff, the vulnerability, the, you know, the original photography, like, and what those tools are set up to do is like spray out a ton of stuff that's the same. And you know, it works for some companies, but I think it's going to be interesting to see if that works as well this year, based on, like I said, based on what I see around the vulnerability and authenticity trend, and then also the share trend, the original content trumping the share. So I don't know. That's my gut on that, but I don't have a lot of stats or anything to back that up.
Hey, Eric, this is Katie Bratland. I just had a question, maybe a little bit different from what you obviously were focusing mostly on, this from like a corporate perspective, but I work with younger athletes who everything to them is getting that little blue check on Instagram. Do you find that that's still something that brands are, do they care a lot about that? If someone doesn't have it in terms of working with them and from the prospect of being an influencer?
Good question. You know what? I'm not sure I know the answer to that.
Okay.
I haven't done a ton of influencer marketing recently, and that's kind of a relatively recent issue.
Yeah.
Especially with athletes, like you said. Now we can work with athletes, right? So like, that's a great question. I'm not sure I have the answer to that.
Yeah, because it seems like sometimes you see people who don't have a lot of following who have verification.
Yeah.
And they're not even posting very much or engaging, and others who have huge followings and huge engagement and don't have verification. So
what I would say is, like, though, it comes down from a company perspective, it comes down to research, right? The blue check mark or not, like, you still got to research the athlete and see, okay, what are they posting? What do they care about? What's their cadence? Are they a trustworthy partner for us, right? That's the key. The check mark is an indicator for sure, but it's not like the end all be all or anything. I mean, I don't think it's
right.
My gut tells me it wouldn't be that important, basically, is what I'm saying.
I agree with you. It's a constant battle because, yeah, anyway, that's a huge issue for them. I think it's more of an ego thing than anything else. But
yeah, right. Probably. Yeah, you're probably right.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Thanks for attending. Anyone else? Going once?
I'll jump in.
Oh,
this is Michelle Griffith. Hey, I just had a question. LinkedIn talked about executive presence and kind of what's working versus what's not there.
Yeah.
Are you? I feel like we see a lot of clients kind of holding onto their brand page too, and like wanting to really use that as a platform. If executives are not as open and engaging, are you steering clients away from their own brand page to more individual or executive content, or just advising on types of content for the brand page?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting discussion right now, because you can make a really strong argument that individual executive pages are far more valuable than the corporate page right now. They're just, the engagement levels are just way higher usually. So, so it's not like they're going to ditch you're never encouraging a client to ditch their corporate page. It's just like a website now, like they need it and they need to keep feeding it and need to pay attention to it. But the much more important piece now is the leaders, because it's LinkedIn, just in general. I mean, it's how it is. It's a person to person channel. It's not a person to brand channel necessarily. And that, especially if the executive or the leader can figure out how to figure out the content piece, or even if they don't figure out the content piece. So for example, there's a guy by the name of Jeff Jones who used to be the CMO at Target. He's now the CEO at H&R Block. Like, he has a pretty active LinkedIn channel, but at the same time, what he's really good at is like just commenting on employee stuff. Like H&R Block, all their different advisors around the country, they post a ton of stuff. He's always in there commenting on other people's stuff. And think about the power of that. If you were a big company and your CEO's commenting on, Joe employees, LinkedIn posts from Oklahoma, like, that's a huge employee engagement play for them. So I think those executive channels are becoming they're becoming way too big to ignore anymore. Like that's almost like table stakes. I hate to say it, but it kind of is. Like the leaders need to be out there, and they need to be out there in kind of a big way. Does that answer your question? Kind of.
Totally. Thank you.
It's a big issue though. That's a really, I mean, that kind of ties into the two things I talked about with LinkedIn, but oh man, that's a huge issue right now.
Mm-hmm.
Especially like I showed you, it's not just even small and mid-sized companies. Like Target, like I showed you, like most of their executive team has nothing on LinkedIn. So like yeah, Laisha, she's it. So that might be purposeful. They might be doing that on purpose, but it's interesting that the rest of them aren't out there. If nothing else, just from an employer brand perspective, because like I'm sure Target's struggling to recruit people right now, just like everyone else is. Man, that's just a huge miss for employer brand alone. All right, one more question. Otherwise, I think I'll wrap it up. I'll give you a few more minutes to go back and eat your lunch. A couple of you sent me private questions. I'll get back to you via email. How about that? All right, sounds good. Thanks again for participating. This is going to be, if you have other people you know that missed it, I'm going to be posting a recording of this on my blog. Fingers crossed, hopefully. So look for that tomorrow. I'll send you an email with that link and you can share it if you want to. But otherwise, thank you for participating, and it's good to see a lot of familiar names on the list today. Cheers.